They were said to be the pride of St. Rose Academy. 44 daughters of noble families, groomed from girlhood for grace, discipline, and quiet excellence. Their names were printed in society columns beside the lineage of their fathers, their portraits hung in drawing rooms gilded with oil lamps and polished walnut frames. They were the kind of daughters whose futures were decided in whispers over silver teapots, futures bound to diplomacy, fortune, and reputation. From the outside, St. Rose was a place of order, a convent school hidden at the edge of the southern moors, where the air smelled faintly of sea brine, and the evenings rang with the thin, bell-like chime of the chapel clock. In daylight, its stone facade appeared pale and serene, but in moonlight it turned almost black, the long rows of windows reflecting no light at all, as though they led not into rooms, but into hollow corridors of air. It was in the spring of 1892 when the order's silence was broken, not by screams, not by the tolling of alarm bells, but by absence. The day before their disappearance had been like any other. Lessons in embroidery, penmanship, and the soft lilt of French recitation drifted from the upper floors. The girls, dressed in pale grey uniforms with white cuffs, walked the cloister garden 2 by 2 under the gaze of Sister Miriam. They sang hymns during Vespers, their voices weaving into one unbroken thread that hung in the rafters long after the notes faded. By evening, the oil lamps in the dormitories glowed amber against the cold stone walls. The sea wind carried the scent of rain, and the sisters led the girls in prayer. No one, not even the night porter, noticed anything amiss. And then by dawn, they were gone. Not one remained in her bed. The narrow blankets were smoothed neatly, the pillows resting as though untouched. There were no scuff marks on the floors, no broken locks or forced latches. The gate at the far edge of the grounds was still bolted shut from the inside. The sisters searched the dormitories, the chapel, the refectory, then the gardens, the laundry rooms, the storage cellars. Even the cold rooms beneath the kitchens were inspected. But there was nothing except for a single envelope placed squarely upon the chapel altar. It was sealed with deep red wax. When Mother Superior broke it open, the paper inside crackled faintly, as though it had been folded and unfolded many times before finding its way here. There were only 9 words written in a narrow, careful hand. "We have kept the vow. We will not speak." The letter was unsigned. In the days that followed, the academy's gates were chained shut. Local authorities combed the moors and questioned the sisters, though each insisted she knew nothing. The parents arrived in carriages with crests on their doors and desperation in their voices, demanding answers. They tore through the dormitories themselves, searching for scraps of clothing, for footprints, for anything that could tell them where their daughters had gone. But the sisters repeated the same truth, or the same lie, to every question. No one had seen or heard a thing. And so, by the week's end, the official story was written, that perhaps the girls had conspired to run away, that they had slipped into the night through some unguarded door. But those who had walked the academy grounds knew there were no unguarded doors. Yet the strangest detail was not their absence, but what was left behind. In the common room, the embroidery hoops lay open on the tables, each half-finished rose still threaded with silk. The piano bench remained pulled out, a sheet of music open mid-page. In one of the desk drawers, someone had left a fountain pen uncapped, its ink dried to a black crust. These were not the signs of a deliberate flight. These were signs of people who had intended to return, or had no choice but to leave in the middle of something. The local paper ran the story for a week before it, too, fell silent. There were no ransom notes, no sightings, no rumors, save one. It began with the fisherfolk who lived along the coast, near the cliffs east of the academy. They claimed that on the night of the disappearance, the sea had been unnaturally still. The tide had not shifted, and the moon had appeared blood orange, large enough to touch the horizon. and they said they saw a procession, a line of pale figures walking barefoot along the cliff path, their heads bowed, hands clasped before them. The details varied. Some claimed there were only a dozen figures. Others swore they counted all 44. One old man insisted he saw the sisters of the convent among them, moving silently with their students toward the edge of the cliff. And then, nothing. The path turned, and they were gone. The police dismissed these claims, but in the village people began to lower their voices when speaking of St. Rose. Years later, the building still stands. The academy never reopened, its windows boarded, its gardens grown wild with thorn and ivy. The front gates rust in place, chained as they were the day the girls vanished. The air inside, it is said, smells faintly of salt and candle wax, though the candles have long since burned away. I had reason to know this place. My great-aunt Helena Ward was one of the 44. She was 17, the second daughter of Lord Everett Ward, and the only one in the family with eyes the color of storm water. Her portrait still hangs in the west drawing room of my grandfather's house, though the edges of the canvas have cracked with age. She is smiling in the picture, faintly, as though she knew the painter had caught her at something. My grandfather never spoke of her, but once when I was a child, I overheard my mother and him arguing in the library. She asked why no one had ever told her what really happened to Helena. He answered with something I've never forgotten. She kept her vow, he said, and so must we. When I was old enough to ask my mother what that meant, she only shook her head. But that phrase, "We have kept the vow, we will not speak," has stayed with me all my life. And now, years later, I find myself standing at the gates of St. Rose. The chain is still there, but the lock has been broken. Inside, the garden path is uneven, the stones buckled under moss. The main doors are shut, but as I approach, I see that they too are unlocked. The smell that greets me is exactly as described: salt and old wax. And something else. A faint, sweet scent, like pressed flowers kept too long in a book. The air inside the entrance hall is still. Dust hangs in the light from the high windows. There is no sound except the echo of my own steps. I pass the common room, the music room, the refectory, each frozen in time like a dream that has not yet ended. In the chapel the altar is bare, but the faint shadow of an envelope remains, the outline of it lighter than the surrounding wood, as if it had sat there for years, shielding the grain from the sun. And I begin to think about the vow, what it meant, who made it, and why they would choose silence over the truth. There are things I've learned in life, that sometimes silence is a shield, and sometimes it's a door. But a door to where? And if I choose to open it, will I find answers? Or will I find what they found? Tell me, if you stood in my place, would you want to know? Life at St. Rose Academy moved like clockwork, not hurried, not sluggish, but with the precise rhythm of an old song whose melody everyone knew by heart. At dawn, the bell in the chapel tower called the girls to prayer. At mid-morning, hymnals were closed, books were opened, and the echo of recitation filled the high-ceilinged classrooms. Afternoons were reserved for lessons in the arts, the rustle of skirts over polished floors during dance practice, the measured taps of pen nibs on fine parchment during calligraphy, the steady crescendo of piano scales drifting through sunlit corridors. The academy itself was a secluded jewel of the English countryside, walled gardens and cloistered stone corridors, tucked between windswept moors, and a small river that curled like a ribbon of silver through the valley. Beyond the grounds lay only farmland, patches of woodland and mist that seemed to gather earlier here than anywhere else. Sister Magdalene presided over it all. She was the head mistress, a tall, spare woman whose dark habit fell in perfectly straight lines, and whose voice could command obedience without ever rising above a calm, measured tone. The students feared her discipline, but they also knew her quiet acts of kindness, the way she pressed a warm mug into a crying girl's hands after lights out, or tucked an extra blanket at the foot of a bed during winter's coldest nights. That spring, the 44 students of St. Rose, daughters of noble and wealthy families from across England and the continent, were preparing for the founder's recital. It was the Academy's proudest tradition, a performance said to honor the sacred origins of the school, though no one outside the convent seemed to know what those origins truly were. Parents traveled from London, Paris, and even Vienna to attend. It was during these final rehearsals that Anna Leclerc arrived. Anna was young, too young, some of the older sisters whispered, to hold the position of French instructor. But she came with glowing recommendations and the poise of someone who had worked in fine households before. She had the light, lilting accent of southern France and an air of warmth that contrasted sharply with Sister Magdalene's precision. From the moment she stepped inside St. Rose, Anna felt the air was different. It wasn't something she could name, not quite cold, not quite heavy, but with a faint tension in the walls, as if the stones themselves were holding their breath. Her first days passed in polite introductions and classroom routines, but she began noticing things, little things that didn't fit the image of perfect order. During lessons, a sudden silence would fall among the girls for no apparent reason. A joke shared between two students would die in mid-laugh, replaced by an almost synchronized stillness, their eyes fixed forward, hands folded neatly in their laps. She saw pale faces too, not the faintness of illness, but a drained look, as if something unseen had been taken from them. And once, as she was helping a young girl named Clara gather her books, Anna saw the faint trace of a cut along Clara's palm, thin, straight, no deeper than a paper slice. But it was not the only one. Over the next week she saw others, always on the same hand, always quickly hidden when noticed. When she asked about them, the girls gave the same answer. It was nothing. Sister Magdalene, when approached, simply said, "They are preparing for the recital. Some traditions require discipline," and then she turned away, ending the conversation as gently as closing a door. By the week's end, the recital was only 2 nights away. The days had grown damp and grey, the spring sunlight rarely breaking through the clouds. On that evening, a fog began to gather before sunset, not the thin wisps that sometimes rolled off the river, but a thick swallowing mist that pressed close to the windows and blurred the lamplight into pale halos. Anna, walking back from the library, heard the bells begin to toll. She counted the chimes automatically, 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, and then one more. 13. She stopped. The sound seemed to hang in the air a moment too long, fading slower than it should. The path before her was swallowed in fog. She asked Sister Miriam later if the bells had malfunctioned. Sister Miriam looked at her oddly and said, "The bell always tolls as it is meant to." That night, Anna could not sleep. She lay awake in her small quarters, listening to the distant creak of the building settling in the damp. Somewhere far off, she thought she heard soft footsteps in the corridor, but when she rose to check, the hall was empty. By morning, St. Rose was silent. The first sign was the refectory, every place at the long breakfast table set, but untouched. No tea steamed in the cups. No bread had been taken from the baskets. The dormitories were the same, 44 beds made with military neatness, the white coverlets smoothed flat. Every trunk and wardrobe stood open, but nothing was missing. Dresses hung in perfect rows, hairbrushes lay on vanities, ribbons and lockets rested where they had been the day before. Anna moved from room to room, her breath quickening. In the last dormitory, she found Sister Magdalene standing very still beside a window, her eyes fixed on the fog outside. "They're gone," Anna whispered, though the words felt absurd. Sister Magdalene turned slowly. "No," she said. "They have fulfilled what was asked." Anna didn't understand, but when they went to the chapel together, she saw it, the single envelope lying on the altar, the wax seal unbroken. Mother Superior arrived, her hands trembling as she broke the seal. She unfolded the paper carefully, as though afraid it might crumble. The ink was still damp. "We have kept the vow. We will not speak." No signature. Anna looked at the words until they blurred. She didn't know which was worse, the thought that the girls had written them or that someone else had. Somewhere in the fog outside, a bell tolled once, only once, and then the silence settled again. I tell you this as I stand in that same chapel now, decades later. The air still smells faintly of candle wax. The altar still bears the faint mark of that envelope. The vow, it has not been broken. Not in all these years. But I have to ask you, if a vow demands silence, even in the face of horror, would you keep it? The investigation began before the fog had fully lifted from the grounds. It was led by Inspector Alistair Doran, a man whose presence seemed to darken every threshold he crossed, not from arrogance but from the quiet weight he carried. There was something in his eyes, a shadow of loss that lingered no matter the angle of the light. Later, I would learn the truth. Only 8 months earlier, his own daughter had died in a fever hospital in Edinburgh. She had been the same age as some of the girls here. Doran arrived in a long black coat, his boots leaving damp marks across the stone entryway. He spoke little at first, preferring to walk the grounds in silence, taking in the academy's stillness as if it were a crime scene that might confess on its own if given time. When he finally addressed the sisters, it was with a calm formality. "I am here to determine the truth of what happened on these grounds between the last toll of midnight and the first light of morning. I will need full cooperation." But the cooperation he sought never came easily. The nuns answered his questions in careful, deliberate phrases, never lies but never anything that could open a door to understanding. "No, we heard no noises in the night. Yes, the dormitories were locked as they always are. No, we have not touched anything in the rooms." When he asked about the strange letter on the altar, Sister Magdalene replied, "It is not for us to interpret." Anna tried to help where she could. She told Doran about the cuts she'd seen on the girls' palms, about the silences during lessons, about the 13th toll of the bell. He listened closely, his brow furrowing, his pen moving quickly over the small leather-bound notebook he carried. But each time she spoke with him, she became aware of something else, an almost tangible pressure in the air, as though the very stones of St. Rose were listening and resenting the words being spoken. More than once she glanced toward the chapel and felt absurdly that its dark windows were watching. By mid-afternoon the parents began to arrive. They came in carriages draped in black crepe, their coachmen stiff with formality, their eyes flicking uneasily toward the building. The mothers wore mourning veils, the fathers their best black coats, as though arriving not for an inquiry but for a funeral. Their voices were sharp, demanding, trembling with anger and grief in equal measure. "My daughter would never run away," one woman insisted, her gloved hand tightening on the handle of her parasol. "She wrote to me only last week. She was happy here. My son will not be marrying now." Another father muttered bitterly to no one in particular, staring at the boarded dormitory windows. Doran met their questions with what little he could confirm. The girls were last seen in their beds, no sign of forced entry, no sign of departure. The gates were locked, the grounds undisturbed. The parents did not seem comforted by the absence of clues, only more unsettled. It was in the chapel that Doran lingered longest. The space was silent, except for the faint crackle of old candle wax cooling in its brass holders. The air here was different, heavier somehow, and carrying a faint scent that made Anna's nose sting when she joined him. "Do you smell it?" he asked her quietly. She did. Metallic, faint but undeniable, like iron in water. She looked to the altar, to the smooth ancient stones of the floor. There was no blood, no staining, nothing that could account for it. "It's old," Doran murmured, kneeling to press his palm against the stone. Whatever left this scent, it has been here a long time. The kitchen staff whispered in the halls, their voices dropping as soon as footsteps approached. Anna, passing by the scullery door, caught fragments. Not the first time. Before the war, always girls, always the same. That evening she managed to corner one of the younger kitchen maids, Elsie, while she was carrying linens down to the laundry. "It's true," Elsie whispered, eyes darting nervously toward the door. "This happened before. More than once. My gran worked here as a laundress. She told me girls went missing in her day too. They just didn't call the police back then." When Anna pressed, Elsie shook her head. "Before 1847, I think, but they say all the records from before then are gone, lost in a fire. That's what they tell us. But there was no fire. Not in the building anyway." Anna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the open laundry chute. Later, when she asked Sister Magdalene about it directly, the headmistress's gaze slid past her, as though Anna had spoken of something not worth answering. It was not a denial, but an absence, the kind of absence that left more questions than it removed. The day wore into evening. Parents were ushered into the parlor, where tea was served but hardly touched. Doran moved from room to room, marking his observations in silence, his face unreadable. It was well after sunset when Anna found him again, standing in the narrow corridor that led to the candle vault. The vault was a small, arched room at the far end of the chapel, used for storing the tall beeswax candles that lit the altar during feast days. It smelled faintly of soot and wax, and the air was cool with the breath of old stone. Doran was holding something in his gloved hand. He turned it slowly so that Anna could see. It was a lock of hair, neatly braided, pale gold in color, no longer than a child's hand. Woven tightly into the braid was a set of rosary beads, the tiny silver crucifix glinting in the lamplight. Anna felt the air shift again, that same oppressive heaviness, like the walls themselves had inched closer. Doran Sepp's eyes met hers. "This wasn't set dropped," he said softly. "Where?" she thought. "For whom? And why?" After 44 girls had vanished, would someone leave behind a single braid wrapped in prayer? The vault seemed to grow darker as the question formed in her mind. It was 2 days after the disappearance when Anna first climbed to the attic. The uppermost floor of St. Rose was not used for teaching. Its narrow halls and low, slanted ceilings were the domain of dust and forgotten things. The air grew colder with each step upward, as though the warmth from the rest of the building refused to climb so high. She had gone looking for anything. Any scrap of record the sisters had not lost or hidden behind their careful silences. If the official archives began in 1847, she thought, then perhaps the unofficial ones lived elsewhere. The attic door stuck before it opened, its wood swollen with age. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dried paper, old beeswax, and the sour note of damp that had crept in through decades of winters. Sunlight filtered through a single round window, dust motes drifting like suspended ash in its pale beam. She found boxes of hymnals, crates of broken furniture, and a chest filled with shoes, all of them too small, all of them missing their left lace. It was in the corner, beneath a stack of yellowed choir robes, that she discovered the sketchbook. The cover was plain, the paper inside coarse and browned at the edges. The drawings were childlike but wrong in a way that made Anna's skin prickle. One page showed a procession of girls in white veils, walking barefoot across a floor marked with black circles. Their hands were folded, their heads bowed, and where their mouths should have been, the paper was shaded dark, as though sewn shut. Another drawing showed an altar flanked by 2 tall nuns, but the nuns' faces were blank ovals, featureless and white. In the space where eyes should have been, the artist had drawn only thin, vertical lines like threads pulled tight. The margins were filled with faint, cramped handwriting. Most of it was too faded to read, but certain words stood out, circled again and again. The vow. The keeper beneath. Beneath what? Anna wondered. The chapel. The school. She turned the last page, and her breath caught. It showed the chapel interior, as she knew it. The high altar, the carved railings, the narrow windows. But the floor had been drawn as if peeled away, revealing a dark, jagged space beneath, from which something vast and formless reached upward. Its hands, if they were hands, were made not of flesh, but of knotted strands, as though woven from the same thread that sealed the girls' mouths. That night, Anna dreamed. She stood in the chapel, the pews gone, the walls fading into shadow. The 44 girls were kneeling before her in perfect rows, each holding a slender taper candle. But the flames did not rise straight. They bent inward, as if drawn toward some invisible center. The girls raised their heads in unison. Their lips did not move, but a single thought bloomed in Anna's mind, cold and certain. It is waiting. She woke up with a start, her skin clammy. The air in her room felt strange, brittle, as though every breath might shatter it. Her window pane was rimmed with frost. She reached to touch it, but the chill bit at her fingertips. It was late spring. There had been no frost in the village for months. The next day, Doran went into town to follow his own trail. He had heard a name from one of the kitchen maids, a man who had once been groundskeeper here decades before. They found him in a low-ceilinged public house near the river. He was old, his hands twisted with arthritis, his eyes milky with age, but when Doran introduced himself, something sharp flickered behind them. "You're here for St. Rose," the old man said, more a statement than a question. Doran nodded. "We're looking for anything unusual about the grounds. Anything that might explain." He let the rest hang. The old man sipped from his mug before answering. "Beneath," he said. "It says all beneath." And then he told them. There had been tunnels, a whole warren of them, brick-lined and winding under the main building and part of the grounds. They were older than the school itself, he claimed. Some said they'd been used by priests in times of persecution. Others believed they were older still, dug for reasons no one spoke of aloud. They'd been sealed, he said, after a fire in the 1830s, a fire that had taken more than just timber, though he would not say what. "I tended the grounds for 21 years, the man said, "but I never went down there. The sisters keep their own council, and the walls keep theirs." When they returned, Doran wasted no time. He went straight to Sister Magdalene's office. Anna followed. The headmistress was seated at her desk, her hands folded neatly before her. There were tunnels, Doran said without preamble. "Yusef never mentioned them." "They are sealed," Sister Magdalene replied. "Why?" Her gaze did not falter, but neither did it soften. "Because some doors should never be opened twice." "Did the girls go into them?" Doran pressed. She did not answer. Instead, she closed her eyes and began to speak in Latin, her voice low and rhythmic, like a chant meant to block out something else. Doran repeated the question. She did not stop praying. After several minutes he left, the set of his shoulders tighter than before. Anna lingered in the doorway, watching the headmistress's lips form words she could not understand, and wondering, not for the first time, whether the vow they spoke of was meant to protect the girls or to keep something else contained. The sketchbook weighed heavily in her satchel, its pages pressing against her like a heartbeat. The keeper beneath. Beneath the school. Beneath the altar. Beneath the vow itself. And whatever it was still there. It was Doran who found the entrance. The laundry wing was quiet in the late afternoon, the air steeped in the faint smell of soap and damp linen. At the far end of the corridor, behind a row of cracked wash basins, a narrow door stood half hidden by a hanging sheet. It was locked, but the lock itself was modern, far newer than the tarnished brass fixtures around it. Inside, the room was small, bare, except for a heap of broken mops and the faint line of a seam in the far wall. The bricks were lighter than the surrounding stone, their mortar sharper, cleaner. Etched into the surface were symbols, not crosses, not any church mark Anna knew. Loops intersected with perfect circles, some nested like eyes, others linked like chains. The grooves were shallow, but she felt them beneath her fingertips, a faint warmth, as though the brick had stored sunlight that the air around it could not hold. Doran fetched a crowbar from the gardener's shed. The first blow sent dust curling down in slow spirals. The second cracked a brick clean in half. By the time they had cleared an opening large enough to pass through, the air beyond had reached them, stale, cool, touched with a mineral tang that made Anna think of water locked deep in stone. They stepped inside. The passage was narrow, the ceiling low enough that Doran had to stoop. The walls were brick on one side, rough-hewn stone on the other, and the floor sloped downward almost imperceptibly. Their footsteps echoed too long for the space, as though the sound were being carried somewhere far away. Every dozen paces or so an alcove was cut into the wall. Each held the same arrangement, a rusted chain bolted to the stone, and a small wooden kneeler, its surface worn smooth by years of use. Anna Sade's throat felt dry. "Prayers," she said softly. "Down here." Doran only shook his head. His torchlight caught on the rust, turning it a dull, bloody orange. The deeper they went, the closer the air seemed to press around them. A low vibration hummed in the stone, too faint to be sound, more like the steady pulse of something enormous breathing far away. They reached a chamber. It was round, the ceiling domed, the walls lined with shelves long since emptied. Anna stopped short. Arranged in a perfect ring, each toe pointing inward, were dozens of shoes, small shoes, child-sized, all leather cracked and curling with age. Some still had buckles, others were missing straps entirely. Dust lay over them in an even film, muting their colors to the same ashen gray. The hum in the air deepened. Anna felt it in her teeth, in the hollow behind her eyes. Her knees softened without her meaning them to, an urge to kneel swelling inside her chest. Her throat closed. It was not like choking on air, but as though unseen fingers pressed against her windpipe, gentle yet implacable. She dropped the torchlight toward the floor and saw the dust stirring faintly, as if drawn inward toward the center of the ring. "Anna." Doran's voice was far away, muffled, but his hand was firm on her arm, pulling her back. The moment he did, the grip around her throat loosened. She coughed, the sound sharp in the stillness. Neither of them spoke as they turned back. When they finally emerged into the laundry wing's dim light, the smell of soap and steam felt almost violent in its normalcy. But as Doran sealed the entrance behind them with the hanging sheet, Anna realized the sensation in her chest had not entirely gone. Something below had felt them, and whatever it was, it had not been pleased. The village lay a mile from the academy, a cluster of low, wind-worn cottages huddled around a square of cobblestones and an old stone well. It was the kind of place where every shutter closed at the same hour, and every footstep seemed to pause if a stranger passed. Anna noticed it first, the way eyes followed her from behind lace curtains, the way conversations thinned to silence whenever she and Doran walked into view. The air here was not cold, but it felt withheld, as though even the sunlight rationed itself. The first to speak was a seamstress. She was bent with age, her fingers twisted from years of work, yet her needle still moved deftly over the cloth in her lap. When Anna asked about the academy, the woman did not look up. "I made dresses for them," she murmured. "When I was a girl myself. White ones, fine cotton. Each had a little pocket sewn on the inside. Just here she tapped the hollow at her breast to carry the token." "What token?" Doran asked. The needle paused mid-stitch. "Not mine to say." She lifted her eyes at last, pale as smoke, and Anna felt the unspoken warning there. Enough had been said already. Later, in the churchyard, they met the gravedigger. He was a heavy man with the slow, measured speech of one who worked most of his life among stones and soil. Doran, standing with hands in his coat pockets, asked if he had ever dug for the academy. The man's gaze shifted to the shadowed windows of the church. Once every 10 years, he said. They said bring a coffin, light enough for 2 men to carry. But it said rattle, like there was something inside not meant to keep still. Anar asked what was in them. He spat into the grass. Never opened one. Not after hearing the noise they made. The midsummer festival came up almost by accident. An innkeeper, loosening with drink, let slip that the bright banners and music had once been a quieter thing, a procession, he said, where every girl in the parish walked in white from the square to the chapel gates. Procession of daughters, they called it, meant to keep the land safe. Safe from what? Anna asked. The innkeeper's face closed like a door. You best go before someone decides you asked too much. They left the village as the sun dipped low, casting the hills in long shadows. Anna could not shake the feeling that the silence in their wake was not relief at their departure, but calculation, as if the villagers weighed their presence against some older, greater balance that must not be disturbed. By the time the lights of St. Rose came into view, she understood. The girls had not simply vanished, they had been given. It began with a sound Anna could not unhear, the hollow, uneven echo of 13 bells. She had first noticed it weeks earlier, the night before the girls vanished, when the fog curled around the school like something alive. She had assumed then that it was a mistake, the bell ringer confused or clumsy, but the sketchbook told her otherwise. She kept it hidden under her bed, wrapped in a scrap of linen torn from one of the laundry baskets. By candlelight, she traced each uneven drawing, the graphite smudged by what looked like small, trembling hands. She had grown used to the sight of veiled girls and faceless nuns, grotesque at first, but now strangely mournful. Yet it was the margins, the tiny, cramped words that made her throat tighten. One page showed the Academy Sep's bell tower, drawn in heavy strokes that made it lean like a rotting tooth. Beneath it, in a child Sep's uncertain spelling, were the words 13 for the binding. The night before the vow, Anna turned the page and found the same bell tower again, but this time with thin, wavering lines drawn down from its windows, threads or perhaps ropes, leading into the chapel below. The text here was more certain, more deliberate. When they ring, we go. We kneel. We promise. The phrase stayed with her through the day, surfacing during lessons, at supper, even while she knelt in chapel for evening prayer. She found herself glancing at the girls, those pale, stiffly proper daughters of earls and admirals, and wondering how many of them had known this was coming. It was Doran who brought her the missing piece. He came to her classroom after lessons, the air smelling faintly of rain from the walk across the courtyard. His expression was unreadable, his eyes holding that constant shadow of loss she had learned not to mention. "I've been to the records office in town," he said. "Or rather, what they keep now." He laid a stack of old documents on the desk. Most were thin, their ink faded to brown, but one was heavier, bound in cracked leather. Anal untied the brittle string holding it shut. Inside were names, dozens of them, written in the careful script of a legal scribe. Next to each name was a seal, dark with age, pressed into wax. She did not recognize the seal at first, but Doran tapped it with his finger. Look closely. Not a cross, not a crest, loops and circles, the same as on the tunnel wall. And Anna felt her stomach turn, and the names. Every one belongs to a family with a girl at St. Rose this year. But these signatures aren't set theirs, they belong to their ancestors. This was signed 50 years ago. The paper crackled as she turned a page. There were earlier lists too, 1842, 1792, each 50 years apart, the same families, the same mark. "It's a pact," Doran said quietly. "And it's not just the academy, It sets the town. They said bound to it. Whatever this ritual is, they agreed to it generations ago, and they said kept it. The words hung between them, heavy as stone. Anna wanted to speak, but the air in the room felt thick, as if something pressed against her chest, warning her to be still. That night she could not sleep. She lit her candle and sat on the edge of her bed, the dormitory's silence pressing in from all sides. A faint draught slipped under the door, stirring the flame. It was then she noticed the paper. It lay in the center of the floor, pale in the candlelight. She bent to pick it up, and her breath caught. The handwriting was the same as in the sketchbook. Large loops, uneven lines, the marks of a child unpracticed with a pen. Come before the keeper takes the rest. There was no signature, only a faint smudge in one corner, as if from damp fingers. She did not sleep at all. The next morning she told Doran. He read the note twice before setting it on the table between them. "This matches the drawings," he said. "And it was in your room? No one saw?" "No one," Anna replied. She hesitated. "It feels urgent, as though they want me to act. But not enough to say what's waiting," he finished. They agreed to keep the note between them. Yet Anna could not shake the feeling of being watched. In the corridor she would sometimes glimpse a face vanishing around a corner, not a nun's nor one of the remaining staff. Just the pale suggestion of a child's profile, there and gone. The second note came 2 nights later, slipped into her prayer book. "Hurry. The binding comes." She carried it to her room, pressing it flat on the table beside the first. It was then she remembered the sketchbook's words about the bells, 13 tolls, the night before the vow. When she told Doran, he went still. Then the night they vanished, he said slowly, wasn't it the ritual itself? It was the signal. The thought chilled her. They had been there in the chapel one night before they disappeared, kneeling, promising. The days blurred after that. She could no longer look at the school without seeing it as a vessel for something older and colder than its own stone. The walls seemed to pulse faintly when she passed. Doors closed with a whisper, though she saw no hand upon them. The chapel smelled faintly of iron again, as it had the morning they found the letter. Then one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Anna and Doran met in the corridor outside the chapel. She had brought both notes, intending to show him something she had not dared voice. The faint outline of a symbol, invisible until the paper caught the light, pressed into the fibers by some unseen force. They stood just inside the chapel doors when the first bell rang. It was not the usual clean tone, but something lower, heavier, as though struck deep within the earth. The second came, then the third, the sound rippling through the floorboards beneath their feet. Anna froze. Doran turned sharply toward the belfry stairs, but the rope hung still, swaying slightly as if from a distant breeze. No one was there. The bells kept tolling. 10, 11, 12, and then the 13th. The sound seemed to hang in the air long after it should have faded, a long, low hum that Anna felt more in her bones than her ears. She realized then that the air in the chapel had changed. It was colder, yet not the cold of wind or stone. It was the cold of breath, drawn away. Doran stepped toward the altar, his hand resting lightly on the pistol at his side. "There is no one in the tower," he said, though his voice was quieter than before. Something else rang them. Anna looked at the altar, at the place where, months ago, the letter had been found. She imagined the 44 girls kneeling there, their palms cut, their mouths whispering the promise that bound them for life. The night before the vow. The bells had sounded again, which meant the eve had come once more. But for who? The dawn came weak and grey, pressing dim light through the stained glass like the last glow through dying embers. Anna woke to the sound of hurried footsteps in the hall, the scrape of a key turning too fast in the chapel door. By the time she reached the threshold, the air inside was already wrong, heavy, metallic, sharp enough to make her mouth taste of iron. The altar cloth, white linen embroidered with gold thread, was no longer white. It lay crumpled across the stone, soaked through, scarlet from corner to corner. Drops had fallen to the flagstones in uneven patterns, as if from a vessel carried in trembling hands. There was nobody there. No wound, no sign of struggle. Only the blood, fresh enough to gleam in the dim morning light. Sister Magdalene was on her knees before it, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. Her lips moved in a ceaseless murmur, Latin phrases rolling from her tongue like a litany she had carried all her life. The other sisters stood back, their eyes fixed anywhere but on the altar. Anna stepped forward, but Doran's hand closed briefly on her arm. He glanced at Magdalene, then at the doorway where two younger nuns hovered, pale and rigid. "Best not," he began. "It has begun," Magdalene whispered. Her voice was thin, almost lost in the thick air. She bowed her head further, rocking slightly. "It has begun. The vow is called. The keeper wakes." Anna felt her stomach drop. She shook off Doran Sepp's hand and knelt beside the older nun. "Sister Magdalene, what has begun? Tell me what this means." The nun's eyes flicked toward her, sharp and wet with grief. "Euseb seen the bells ring with no hand upon them. Euseb found the signs, the marks. You think this is an old superstition, perhaps?" "No." She shook her head once, hard. "The vow is not symbolic. It feeds." The word clung to Anna Sepp's thoughts like a burr. "Feeds? On what?" Magdalene Sepp's gaze slid to the altar, to the slow drip of blood pooling in the cracks between stones, in silence. Doran frowned. "You mean the girls, Sess?" "Their vow," Magdalene said. "When they are chosen, they are bound to it. Not just in word, but in spirit. They give their silence freely, though they do not understand the cost. That silence is taken below to what waits there. It feeds on it, sleeps, because of it. If the vow is broken, if the silence ends before the appointed span, then it wakes." Anna Sepp's mouth was dry. "And if it wakes?" The nun did not answer at once. She pressed the heel of her hand to her eyes, as though warding off a memory. "When the stones were first laid here," she said slowly, "there was something already in the ground. They did not build the chapel to honor it. They built it to keep it. They bound it in prayer and ritual, and they gave it the one thing it could be made to take without devouring the rest." "Silence," Anna said. Magdalene nodded. "The vow keeps it still. The chosen carry the burden for all. We do not speak of it, because to speak is to weaken the bond." Doran Sepp's voice was flat. "And the families agreed to this. They signed the pact you found," Magdalene said. "Generations ago. Each family gives a daughter when the time comes. Without them, the land would not be safe, the town would not stand, the keeper would rise." Anna felt the chill deepen, though no wind touched her. "How do you know this?" Magdalene Sepp's lips tightened. "Because I was to be one of them." The chapel seemed to grow smaller. "I was chosen when I was 17, the nun went on, her voice thin and far away. "It was the year of the last binding. But my sister, younger by 2 years, stepped forward in my place. She said she could not watch them take me. I tried to stop her, but the vow must be taken willingly. She walked into the chapel, knelt before the altar, and gave her silence. I have not heard her voice since." She turned her eyes on Anna then, and for the first time Anna saw something beyond grief, the hollow, enduring weight of debt. "I have served here all my life to keep the vow whole," Magdalene said, "to keep the rest of us alive." Doran crouched beside them. "Then we end it. We find the girls, break the vow, and get them out." Magdalene Sepp's expression hardened. "You cannot. To break the vow is to lose what they hold. It will not free them. It will only bring the keeper into the world above." Anna thought of the tunnels, the humming air, the ring of shoes in the dust. She thought of the dreams, the 44 kneeling girls, the candle flames bending inward. "If we do nothing," she said, "the girls are gone forever." "They are not gone," Magdalene said sharply. "They are bound. It is not the same." "Bound to what?" Doran demanded. The nun's eyes darted to the altar, as though expecting the stones themselves to listen, to the thing beneath, to the keeper. "It has no shape you would know, no face you could name, but it waits, always. It listens for the cracks in its prison. The silence fills those cracks. That is the truth of the vow." Anna's mind reeled. The keeper, a thing without shape or face, bound under the chapel, fed by decades of silence. The pact ensured it never woke up. And now, the bells had tolled. The binding had begun. She remembered the note, "Come before the keeper takes the rest." Her voice came low, almost to herself. "Someone wants me to come into the tunnels, before it seeps too late." Doran turned to her sharply. "And that someone might be the same thing we severed trying to stop." "No," Anna said. "The script, it does a child, does hand, the same as the sketchbook. I think it sets one of them, one of the bound girls." "That makes no sense," Doran said. "If they said taken the vow, maybe they found a way to warn me." Anna cut in. Magdalene shook her head, the movement sharp. "You do not understand. The vow binds more than their voices. It binds their will. If one of them calls to you, then something else is moving them to it, and that something is not their own heart." A silence fell. The altar seemed to breathe. Somewhere above, a beam creaked under the weight of age, or of listening. Finally, Doran stood. "If what you say is true, sister, then we have two choices. We leave them to this thing, or we risk waking to save them." Magdalene Sepp's eyes closed briefly, as though she could shut out the choice. "It is no choice at all," she murmured. "You would doom us all." "And if the pact is wrong?" Anna asked. "If it's Seben's just a chain the town convinced itself it had to wear?" Magdalene Sepp's gaze turned on her, fierce despite the tears still bright in her eyes. "I have heard the earth breathe beneath my feet. I have felt it shift in its sleep. It is not wrong." The conversation ended there, not by choice but by necessity. The other nuns were coming, whispering about clearing the altar, fetching clean linen. Magdalene rose and went with them, her steps slow, her shoulders bent as though carrying not just the years but the weight of what lay below. Anna and Doran stood alone in the back pews. "She believes every word," Doran said finally. Anna nodded. "That doesn't mean she sits right." "No," he agreed. "But if she is, we start walking straight towards something we can set fight." Anna looked at the altar one last time, at the blood soaking into the stone. In her mind she saw the tunnel entrance, the ring of shoes, the symbols in the brick. She thought of the bell's final toll, the 13th that had hung in the air like a held breath. "We have to try," she said. Doran Sepp's jaw tightened. "Then we do it before the binding ends." They left the chapel without another word, but the silence followed them, the kind that felt less like absence and more like the weight of an ear pressed close, listening for the first fracture in its prison. The trapdoor was not meant to be found. It hid beneath the altar, under the weight of centuries, sealed by wood blackened with wax drips, and the faint scorch of long-quenched candles. It was only when Doran pressed his ear to the floor, following a tremor that rippled faintly under the stone, that they'd found it, a square outline almost lost in the grain. The hinges shrieked, like something alive when he forced them open. A narrow staircase wound into the dark, older than the chapel above, each step cut unevenly into the bedrock. The air that rose was cool but stale, with an undercurrent Anna could not place, not rot exactly, nor damp, but a taste of something that had been still for too long. They descended in silence, the beams of their lanterns glancing off the walls. Symbols were carved into the stone at intervals, loops, lines intersecting arcs that reminded Anna of the marks in the sketchbook, though these were deeper, gouged as if by iron rather than ink. "Older than the town," Doran muttered once, running his fingers over a spiral that seemed to coil in on itself the longer she looked at it. The stairs ended at a low archway. Beyond it lay a tunnel, wide enough for two to walk abreast, its ceiling so low Doran had to duck. Anna caught glimpses of side passages, narrow throats in the rock that vanished into shadow. The air grew thicker as they walked, the same subtle hum vibrating in her chest that she'd felt in her dreams. They walked for what felt like minutes, stretched thin, the hum deepening. Then the tunnel widened abruptly into a cavern. Anna stopped at the threshold. The space was vast, its roof lost to shadow, lit by hundreds of candles that lined the walls and ringed the chamber's center. The flames burned steady and silent, yet the wicks were whole, untouched by fire. No wax pooled beneath them. Their light was cold, casting no heat, and it seemed to bend around the figures within. The 44 girls knelt in a perfect circle, veils of pale gauze draped over their heads. Their dresses were the same simple white linen, sleeves to the wrist, hems to the ankle. Hands rested in their laps, still as carved stone. None moved, none breathed that Anna could hear. In the center of the circle stood a figure. It was tall and impossibly thin, its spine a long, unbroken line beneath rotting vestments whose embroidery had worn away to threads. The cloth hung in tatters, heavy with mildew and dust, yet it moved faintly as though stirred by a wind Anna could not feel. Its face was covered by a mask, featureless, smooth, the color of bone. The hum was louder here, resonating through the stone. It wasn't a sound so much as a pressure, as if the air itself was speaking in a language too low for ears. Anna's skin prickled beneath it. Doran stepped forward before she could stop him. His boot struck the stone with a sound that echoed too far for such a small movement. The figure in the center turned its head, slowly. The motion was deliberate, mechanical, as though it weighed the act itself. The mask caught the candlelight, but reflected nothing. And then, in one perfect motion, every girl turned to face him. The veils shifted like pale water, and Anna saw the faint outline of their features beneath. The same hum now carried a rhythm, a pulse, though no one moved their lips. The red thread was the first detail she could truly focus on, bright as fresh blood, sewn through each girl's mouth in uneven stitches that bit into skin. Some had thread that looked new, taut and unfrayed. Others bore faded strands that had darkened with time, but none were broken. Anna felt her breath catch. The voices came at once, not aloud. Her ears heard only the hum, but in her mind, clear and layered, 44 threads woven into one impossible chorus. Leave or take the vow. The words were not hostile. They were inevitable. Like the tolling of the bells, a statement of what must be, not what might. Doran froze where he stood. Anna saw the muscles in his jaw work as though he were biting back a reply. The tall figure did not move closer, but the candlelight around it wavered as if it breathed. Anna had the sudden, sick certainty that it was not the source of the voice. It was a vessel, or a guard. The voice belonged to the circle itself. "Who are you?" Anna whispered, though the sound of her voice felt wrong here, like a stone thrown into still water. The chorus answered, without hesitation, "We are silent. We are the chain." Doran took another step. "You said of the ones they call chosen." "We are the seal," the voice replied. "We are the stone that does not break." Anisette's gaze flicked to the mask. "And that?" This time the pause was long enough that she thought they would not answer, but the reply came, heavier than the first. "The keeper's hand, the one who listens when we do not speak." The hum pressed harder against her skull now. Anna had the sense of something beneath them, deeper than the floor, deeper than the chamber. shifting in slow, enormous movements. Doran's voice was low. "We can get you out." The veiled heads tilted in unison, as if considering, then break the thread, and the vow is broken. Break the vow and the keeper wakes. Anna stepped forward, her lantern trembling in her hand. "Then why call me here? Why leave the notes? Why warn me?" Something like a ripple passed through the circle. The veil of the girl nearest Anna shifted slightly, enough for her to see the eyes beneath, wide, dark, and filled with something she could not name. "The keeper is hungry. The pact weakens. The next will be taken before the 50 years are done. You must see. You must choose." Choose what? But the hum was growing now, no longer steady, a pulse that rose and fell like a breath. The tall figure moved its head again, slow and deliberate, until the mask faced her fully. The voice filled her mind one last time, sharper now, urgent: "Leave or take the vow." Anna stumbled back, hitting Doran's shoulder. The hum swelled until it was all she could feel, rattling her teeth, her bones. The candles leaned inward, their flames bending toward the center of the circle. Doran grabbed her arm. "We started going." The figure in the center did not follow, nor did the girls, but their veiled faces tracked them until the tunnel swallowed the light. The hum followed longer still, receding only when the trap door slammed shut above them. Anna Sip's voice broke against the stale air. "Come with us. Please, you don't have to stay here." She was speaking to the nearest girl, though her eyes roamed the circle, trying to catch some flicker of movement, some sign that the 44 heard her plea, but they did not stir. The veiled heads remained bowed just enough to obscure their faces, their hands resting neatly in their laps as if carved there. Even the faint shifting of breath was absent. Only the hum answered her, constant and low, like a note drawn from the deepest string of an instrument the size of the world. "They can't leave," Doran said, not to her but to himself. "It's part of it, part of the vow." His eyes flicked from one girl to another, landing on none for long, as though looking at them hurt. Anna's gaze found him in the pale light. His face was drawn tight, the set of his jaw the same she had seen once before, the day he spoke of his daughter. She'd been taken to another town, under other circumstances, but the grief in him was the same as these parents must have felt. "They can," Anna said, more sharply than she intended. "If we break the vow, they die." He cut in, voice hard, but his hands trembled at his sides. "Or something worse happens." Magdalene said it wasn't, said it just death. From the center of the circle, the keeper moved. It was a small movement at first, a slow unfolding of its long arms, but the effect was enough to shift the air. The tatters of its vestments stirred, and one skeletal hand extended toward them. The candlelight shuddered across the mask's featureless surface. The hand was wrong. The skin at the wrist was stitched with something coarse and dark, and as the arm reached further, those stitches split, parting not with the tearing of flesh, but like seams opening to reveal what had been trapped beneath. Something darker than shadow shifted inside, writhing as though impatient. The hum deepened until Anna's teeth ached. Doran didn't move. His eyes were locked on the keeper's hand. Anna's attention drifted to the girls again, and that was when she saw it. The thread that sealed their mouths wasn't thread at all. It was hair. Not cut hair, not cleanly severed strands, but lengths still rooted, each stitch pulling taut at a tiny piece of pale scalp. The ends vanished beneath their veils, disappearing into the darkness of faces she could no longer bear to imagine. A sick heaviness gripped her stomach. The hum shifted again, and for a moment Anna felt as if she were not standing in a cavern, but in the hollowed skull of some immense thing. Understanding came not as thought but as intrusion. They are not sacrifices. Vessels. Not just offerings to the keeper, extensions of it, bound to carry whatever it was that stirred beneath the stone, bound by something older than the pact with the town. Each mouth sewn shut, not to silence them, but to keep what was inside from spilling out too soon. If they broke the vow, if those mouths opened, the keeper would not be denied. It would simply need new vessels, new daughters, perhaps all of them, across the hills and fields and valleys until its hunger was sealed again. Her stomach turned at the thought, and she stepped back. The keeper's hand lingered in the air between them. It was an offering, an invitation, and a command all at once. The shifting beneath its wrist pressed harder against the splitting stitches, as if eager to be free. Onair reached for Doran Sip's arm. "We can sit. You can sit." He looked at her then, and she saw the choice already made in his eyes. "It doesn't have to take the others," he said quietly. "If I take the vow, it sids me, not them. And maybe—" "It once said end there," she hissed, trying to drag him back. "You don't said know what it will make of you. You don't said know what—" "I know what it's already made of," he said, glancing at the circle. "I know it's my fault," she said's gone. "I couldn't save my own daughter. I can save someone sets." Anariaset's grip tightened, nails biting into his sleeve. "This isn't set saving. It's set's feeding it." Doran's gaze didn't waver. His breathing had slowed, his shoulders settling, as if the fight in him had drained away, replaced by a grim resolve. She realized with a rush of panic that he wasn't torn anymore. The keeper had seen to that. The hum filled her head until her own thoughts felt distant. It was in her chest, in her pulse. She could hear it without her ears, and she hated the way it almost sounded like acceptance. The keeper's hand extended a fraction closer, the split at its wrist widening, that dark, shifting presence pushed against the opening like a living thing against glass, seeking the crack. Anasep's voice came out raw. "Doran, please." But he had already stepped forward. One pace, then another. The circle of girls did not move to stop him, nor did they shift their gaze from where they had been fixed, but the hum swelled into something that might have been anticipation. The air between Doran and the keeper thickened, candle flames bending toward them. Anna could taste the weight of it in her mouth, dry and metallic, like the air before a lightning strike. When he stopped, he was close enough that the hem of the keeper's vestments brushed the front of his coat. He raised his hand. For a moment, Anna thought, hoped, he might strike, that this was some desperate feint to break the circle, to test whether the keeper could even be touched. But Doran's palm stayed open, steady, and he lowered it toward the extended hand before him. The keeper tilted its head slightly, the mask's blank surface catching a cold reflection from the candlelight. The stitches at its wrist tore further, the darkness beneath uncoiling like smoke in water. Anna's breath caught as his fingers brushed its palm. The hum roared, not in volume but in depth, as though the world had suddenly been hollowed to make room for it. Every candle flame bowed inward, bending toward the two figures. In the circle, the girls' veiled heads tilted up as one, the hair thread in their mouths tightening like drawn bowstrings. Beneath the veils, their jaws moved a silent opening, a swallowing. The air in the chamber shifted again, and Anna's vision wavered at the edges, as though the space itself were bending. She wanted to run. She wanted to drag him away, but her legs locked beneath her. The hum was in her bones now, telling her in its wordless way that this was how it was always meant to be. Doran's eyes were closed. His lips moved, but no sound came. Anna recognized the shape of the words from the sketchbook and the whispers she had read in the chapel's margins. "I vow to be silent. I vow to bind." The keeper's other hand rose slowly, placing its palm over their joined hands. The darkness beneath its split skin seeped along the seam where they touched, winding upward toward Doran's arm like black veins. Anna finally found her voice. "Doran." But he didn't yet look at her. The last thing she saw before the darkness reached his shoulder was his mouth moving one final time, silently, as if sealing something only he could hear. Then the hum sank lower, like a chord resolving, and the candle flame stood straight again. The keeper released him. Doran staggered back, but did not fall. His eyes opened, and Anna saw nothing of him in them. They were steady, unblinking, and utterly calm. His mouth was shut, his lips pressed together in the stillness of the 44 girls. The hair thread gleamed faintly in the dim light binding his mouth closed. It was the first week of the new term when the gate swung open again. The academy's iron fence, long streaked with rust, had been scrubbed to a dull sheen. Fresh paint masked the weathering on the shutters. The gardens had been pruned back into obedience, and the smell of mortar dust still lingered from repairs no one remembered requesting. From the outside, it looked like a school reborn, a place eager to receive the next generation of girls who would study within its walls. No one spoke aloud about why it had been closed at all. The 44 graduates of the previous year had never returned home. Officially, their records had been transferred to other institutions. Some families even received letters, strange, formal things written in looping script, signed by names they didn't recognize, assuring them their daughters were thriving in distant environs more suited to their advancement. Those who tried to travel to the given addresses returned before reaching them, their journeys cut short by sudden illness, a broken wheel, or the simple, unshakable conviction that turning back was the only safe thing to do. Doran Seb's name vanished faster than theirs. It wasn't simply that he was missing, it was as if he had never been. His position in the constabulary had been filled without ceremony. His files were gone, his badge number reassigned. People who remembered him did so faintly, with the imprecision of recalling a neighbor from childhood, a blur of features, a general shape, but nothing fixed. Speak his name, and the syllables felt heavy in the mouth, like a stone you realized you should never have picked up. In his absence, the academy appointed a new headmistress, Anna. Her acceptance had been announced in the parish bulletin, a terse paragraph with no mention of her previous position or the suddenness of her elevation. Sister Magdalene's resignation was explained away as a much-deserved rest after years of dedicated service, though no one had seen her leave. Some whispered she had taken the veil in another cloister, others that she had been sent abroad. But even those who believed the first story admitted it had been years since Magdalene looked like a woman at rest. Anna did not look tired. If anything, she looked composed. Her eyes had lost the restless darting that once searched every shadow for answers. They were still now deep and flat as dark water. Her voice, once bright with questions and a faint edge of defiance, had grown quiet, not subdued exactly, but tempered, measured. When she spoke to the girls in assembly, her words landed like small stones dropped into a pond, no splash, but ripples that spread unseen beneath the surface. The parents liked her. They said she was attentive, that she listened well. They said she had a way of making a person feel as though they were the only one in the room, even in a crowded hall. The girls listened too, perhaps more than usual. Classes resumed. Bells marked the hours, and every evening, at Vespers, candles burned on the altar. There should have been 44, one for each of the previous year's chosen daughters, as tradition dictated, but there were 45. Always 45. No one lit them in view of the congregation. They were simply there every night, flames steady and tall. At first people assumed it was an error, a caretaker's miscount, an overzealous acolyte, but the extra candle never moved from its place, second from the right, in the front row. Eventually no one mentioned it at all. The bells resumed their punctual ringing, their measured chimes marking the rhythm of life in the town once more. But now and then, not often, but often enough to be remarked upon in whispers, they tolled 13 times at the evening hour. And if you asked someone whether they had heard it, they might answer yes, but always without looking you in the eye. If you asked whether they had counted, they would shake their head and say, too quickly, no. Life went on. The market reopened. The harvest came in on time. The weather was mild. Whatever shadow had hung over the town in those uneasy weeks had lifted, though it was not forgotten. You could feel it in the pauses between words, in the way conversations veered gently away from certain topics. One autumn evening, after the last of the pupils had gone to their dormitories and the chapel had emptied of hymn and murmur, Anna stood alone at the altar. The light was dim, the only illumination was the thin columns of flame along the altar rail. They burned without flicker, as though the air in the chapel did not dare disturb them. Her shadow stretched long across the flagstones, bending strangely at the place where the trapdoor lay hidden. She moved slowly, her steps soundless on the worn stones, checking each door and latch. Her fingers lingered on the cold iron of the bolts, the keys on her ring whispering against one another. The 45 candles burned steadily. Their wax never seemed to run low. Anna looked at them for a long time. Her face was calm, but her eyes did not blink for longer than was natural. In the stillness, the faint hum of the air was almost noticeable, a vibration so low it could be mistaken for silence. When she was certain she was alone, she closed the heavy chapel doors. The lock clicked. Her hand remained on the key for a moment before she turned away, her voice no louder than the strike of a match. The vow is kept. The flames did not waver. Somewhere deep beneath the stones, something shifted in its sleep,